I never imagined that the daughter I raised with my own hands, the one I sacrificed everything for, would one day put a price on my life. The day the doctor told me I had cancer, my world fell apart, but my son-in-law, Tyler, didn't seem shaken. Instead of fear, I saw greed flicker in his eyes. He calmly said, "Mom, let's get the property papers ready first, then we'll take you to the hospital." That was the moment I realized the disease wasn't just inside my body. It had already spread into my home. Hi, my name is Margaret, and I'm 60 years old. I live in a quiet suburb of Austin, Texas, in the house my late husband, Robert, and I built when our daughter, Emily, was still small enough to fall asleep on my shoulder during thunderstorms. The house sits on a corner lot with a pecan tree in the front that leans just enough to cast shade over the porch swing. If you listen from that porch on summer evenings, you could hear the faint thrum of cicadas and the distant hum of the interstate. Inside, the floors creak in familiar places, the kitchen smells like vanilla and old recipes, and every hallway holds a framed photograph that insists time can be tender if you let it. I used to teach second grade at the local elementary school, which means the pantry still keeps a stash of Gold Star stickers and construction paper I never learned to throw away. Robert's favorite baseball cap still hangs on the hook by the back door. I keep telling myself I'll box it up, and then I never do. Some things stay because you can't bear to let them go. Others stay because they guard you when you're not looking. Emily moved back in with me 2 years ago, shortly after she married Tyler. They said it would be temporary while they saved for a place of their own. Austin isn't cheap, and the market is competitive, Tyler likes to say, with a sharp little smile. I said yes without thinking, the way mothers do. Emily is my only child, the reason I learned to balance a checkbook at midnight and how to stretch a casserole across 3 days. When she carried her boxes up the porch steps, breathless and laughing, I felt the house exhale with me. Tyler followed behind her, careful with his clothes, careful with his watch, careful in the way men are when they want to make a good impression without wrinkling their shirt. He brought a bottle of Cabernet and a phone that never stopped buzzing. He said he was in real estate, investments, flips, syndications, words that sounded important and expensive and somehow always just out of reach. There is a certain kind of charm that lays itself over some people like a clean white tablecloth. Tyler had that. He set it down between us at dinner the first night and kept it there always. He complimented the roast chicken and asked for seconds. He praised the neighborhood, the light in the living room, the size of the lot. "This corner is undervalued," he said, as if the house were a stock ticker. With the right updates, the appreciation curve could be impressive. I nodded and refilled his glass. I told myself he was simply ambitious, and ambition isn't a crime. But notes of appraisal kept slipping into his conversation like a coin dropped into a jar, each one harder to ignore than the last. If you had passed our kitchen window in the mornings, you would have seen 3 people performing a peaceful routine. I'd be whisking eggs while Emily sliced strawberries, and Tyler, sleeves rolled to his forearms, would stand at the counter tapping something into a spreadsheet on his laptop. He always faced the backyard while he worked, as though he were measuring it with his eyes. "You know, an ADU would do well out there," he'd say, not looking up. "Great rental yield." I pretended I didn't hear. I didn't want to pick a fight with potential. It's easier to put off worry when it wears the mask of success. My days were simple in a way that felt like a promise kept to my younger self. I walked the neighborhood just after sunrise, when the sky was the color of a peach and the asphalt hadn't remembered the heat yet. I said hello to Mrs. Green, who watered her roses in a bathrobe, and to the Brunos Labrador, who believed every greeting was a brand new miracle. Afterward, I made coffee and sat on the porch swing with my journal, a habit I adopted after Robert died, because grief needs a small fence to lean against. On the pages, I planted tiny seeds of gratitude, the sound of Emily laughing in the hallway, the smell of rain blown in from the west, the way the pecan leaves flickered like signals from another language. When you have lost something irreplaceable, the world repays you in details if you pay attention. It started with a cough I couldn't blame on allergies. In Texas, we always have something to blame: cedar fever, dust, the air conditioning. But the cough threaded itself through my days, tugging every time I climbed the stairs or carried laundry from the dryer. I told myself I was just out of breath, 60 is not 40, after all, and carried on. One afternoon, while I was reorganizing the pantry I've reorganized 100 times, I had to grip the counter until the room stopped tilting. Emily found me there, breathless and laughing it off, hand on my chest like a student who'd run too fast to recess. She frowned, then smoothed her face quickly, the way daughters do when they don't want their mothers to see the worry that feels like a mirror turned around. At dinner that night, Tyler mentioned a podcast about market trends and aging homeowners. "There's a wave coming," he said, twirling his fork. "Downsizing, trusts, asset protection. It's going to reshape neighborhoods like this one." He gestured with his chin toward the front window, as if the street lamp were presenting a chart. "With the right timing, you can convert equity into opportunity. I've been advising some clients to prepare documents before they need them. It just makes transitions cleaner." He didn't look at me when he said it, but I felt the words land, soft as dust. Emily squeezed my hand under the table. I told myself they were only being practical, that prudence isn't the same as plotting. And yet, somewhere inside me, a small hinge clicked. When the cough woke me in the night, I crept down to the kitchen and poured a glass of water. The house sounded different in those hours, more bone than body, the refrigerator a far-off train, the clock with its steady metronome heart. I stood by the window and watched the porch sway once in a wind I couldn't feel. Robert built that swing our first spring here, driving the hooks into the ceiling beam with a stubborn joy that made the neighbors come and cheer when it finally held. I touched the glass and felt, for a moment, the cool of his patience. I promised the dark that I would call the doctor tomorrow. Then I promised myself I would keep that promise. The next morning I left early for the clinic without telling Emily. I told myself it was because I didn't want to worry her, but the truth is simpler and less noble. I wanted a few more hours when the not knowing was still a kind of safety. The waiting room smelled like lemon disinfectant and the pages of old magazines. A television played a loop of health tips. No one was watching. When they called my name, I stood too quickly and the world swam again, then sharpened with a cold efficiency of fluorescent light. Tests are just questions asked in a language your body understands before your mind does. I answered them the way I've answered questions my whole life, politely, completely, and hoping I'd studied the right chapters. By the time I drove home, the sun was high enough to wash the street in that white Texas heat that makes even the mailboxes look tired. Emily was on the porch steps, phone in her hand, eyes searching the corner where I always appear. "Where did you go?" she asked, too bright, too casual. I told her. She nodded, and her mouth did a small thing it used to do when she was 6 and trying not to cry. Tyler appeared behind her in the doorway, a silhouette cut from confidence. He said he hoped everything went smoothly and asked if the clinic had mentioned estate planning, as some do as a courtesy. I said I hadn't asked. He laughed softly, as if I'd made a joke. I walked past him into my kitchen, where the light fell across the counter in a clean diagonal. I set my purse down and the house, my house, listened with me. The next morning came wrapped in that gray light that makes everything feel half awake. I sat in my car outside the medical center, watching people come and go with the kind of casual confidence you lose when you're waiting for answers. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant and asphalt after rain. Inside, the nurse greeted me with a kind smile and a clipboard, the way people smile when they already know what they can't yet say. The doctor's office was too clean, too quiet. He spoke carefully, like each word had been weighed before being released into the room. "Margaret," he said, "your scans show signs of lung cancer. It's early, but we have to act quickly." For a second, it felt like the air disappeared. The word cancer is small, but it echoes endlessly once it lands. I nodded, the way people nod when they're pretending to understand the language of shock. Driving home, the world looked the same, blue sky, trimmed lawns, kids riding bikes, but something had shifted. Every color seemed sharper, almost cruel in its brightness. When I pulled into the driveway, I could see Emily through the kitchen window, laughing at something on her phone, Tyler pacing behind her with his Bluetooth in his ear. I sat in the car longer than I should have, letting the engine hum like a heartbeat that wasn't mine. When I finally stepped inside, Emily's smile faded. "Mom, you look pale." What happened? I tried to sound calm, but my voice cracked on the word doctor. It's cancer, I whispered. She gasped, her eyes filling instantly. Tyler turned, his phone still in hand, and said, "How bad?" Not, "I'm so sorry." Not even, "Are you okay?" Just, "How bad?" The silence that followed stretched thin as wire. I told them it was treatable, that surgery and chemotherapy could help. Emily rushed to hug me, crying into my shoulder, but over her hair, I could see Tyler's face. He wasn't crying. He was thinking, calculating. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling fan spinning shadows across the room. I thought about Robert, how he used to hold my hand through storms, whispering, "Whatever happens, we'll face it together." I wondered what he'd say now, if he'd recognized the cold edge in his son-in-law's voice when Tyler had asked, almost casually, if I had made a will. The next morning, Tyler brewed coffee and sat across from me at the table. "Mom," he began smoothly, "I've been thinking. If, God forbid, something happens, it would be messy with the property. The trust, taxes, probate, it could take months. Maybe we should transfer the house to Emily now, just for safety. You know, simplify things." I stared at him, searching for a trace of sincerity, but all I found was hunger behind his calm. Emily, still shaken from yesterday, nodded slowly. "He's right, Mom," she said softly. "You don't want complications if it gets worse." I wanted to shout, to ask her if she heard what she was saying, but the word stuck somewhere between anger and disbelief. I just nodded and said I'd think about it. When they left the kitchen, I sat alone with my coffee growing cold. The hum of the refrigerator filled the silence. I looked around at the house, the same walls that had held birthday parties, Christmas mornings, laughter echoing down the hallways. And now those same walls were listening to whispers about inheritance. That evening, I stood on the porch, watching the sun slide behind the pecan tree. The light turned golden, then red, then finally disappeared, leaving only the sound of crickets and my own breathing. I pressed my palm against my chest and whispered to myself, "It's not just sickness in my lungs, it's sickness in my home." In the days that followed, Tyler became the picture of devotion. He brought me tea every morning, reminded me to take my medication, and even offered to drive me to my doctor's appointments. To anyone watching, he might have looked like the perfect son-in-law. But I knew better. His kindness came wrapped in calculation, each gesture too polished, too rehearsed. Every time he smiled, I could hear the soft rustle of papers behind it, papers waiting for my signature. Emily followed his lead, though I could tell her heart wasn't in it. She hovered nervously between us, as if she could sense the current of something dark moving beneath the surface, but couldn't name it. "Mom," she said one evening, her voice gentle but uncertain, "Tyler just wants to make sure things are organized. You know, in case." The way she said "in case" made my stomach turn. I wanted to remind her that I wasn't gone yet, that I still breathed, still existed, but I just smiled faintly and nodded. Tyler began leaving real estate brochures around the house, catalogs of lakefront properties and new developments. "Just ideas," he said lightly. "For when you feel better. Maybe you and Emily can downsize. Use the equity wisely." Every word felt like a shovel scraping closer to my grave. I noticed how he spoke about my home as though it already belonged to him. Once, I caught him in the study, running his hand across Robert's old desk, tracing the carved initials we'd made when we first moved in. I didn't say anything, but the air between us turned cold. I try to keep busy. Some mornings, I baked bread just to fill the kitchen with warmth, the smell of something alive. Other days, I organized old photo albums, though the memories hurt more than they healed. There was one picture I couldn't stop staring at. Emily at 12, holding a fishing pole taller than herself, Robert standing behind her, his arm draped protectively across her shoulder. His eyes in that photo looked full of quiet pride. I wondered what he'd think if he saw how far we'd drifted from that moment. One night, I couldn't sleep. The house felt heavy, full of unspoken words. I went downstairs for a glass of water and found Tyler sitting at the dining table, his laptop open, numbers glowing on the screen. He looked up, startled, then smiled too quickly. Couldn't sleep either? He asked. I shook my head. Just thirsty. He closed the laptop slowly, almost like he was hiding something. You know, he said casually, I spoke to a financial advisor today. If we transfer ownership now, it'll save a lot in taxes. It's really the smartest move. He leaned back in his chair, his confidence like a knife disguised as charm. I'll handle all the paperwork for you, of course. You shouldn't have to worry about anything stressful right now. Something in me hardened. For the first time in months, I didn't feel weak. I looked him straight in the eye and said, Tyler, thank you for your concern, but I'll handle my own affairs. The smile on his face faltered, just for a second. Then he laughed lightly. Of course, Mom. Just trying to help. But his eyes, those calculating eyes, were already moving past me, searching for another way in. The next day, Emily avoided me. She moved through the house quietly, folding laundry, answering calls in whispers. When I asked if everything was okay, she forced a smile and said, Tyler's just worried about the future. We both are. I wanted to take her hands, shake her, remind her of everything I'd done to give her a safe life. But the words wouldn't come out. Maybe she already knew and didn't want to face it. That evening, I took a long walk alone through the neighborhood. The air smelled like rain, the kind that never quite arrives. I passed the school where I used to teach and thought about my students, how I'd always told them to be kind, to never let the world make them small. I realized I needed to take my own advice. When I returned home, Tyler was on the phone, pacing the living room. His tone was low, but I caught fragments. Title transfer, soon, no resistance expected. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I simply sat on the edge of my bed and decided that if they could make plans behind my back, I could make one of my own. I opened my bedside drawer and pulled out an old business card, Mr. Jacobs, attorney-at-law. He had handled Robert's estate years ago and was one of the few people I still trusted. I turned the card over in my hand and whispered, tomorrow. The next morning, I woke earlier than usual before the first light stretched across the curtains. The house was still, caught in that quiet pause between night and day. I brewed a small pot of coffee, poured it into a thermos, and slipped out without waking anyone. The air outside was cool and sharp, the kind of Texas morning that smells faintly of dust and dew. I drove downtown to the law office of Mr. Jacobs, the same man who had guided Robert and me through the long paperwork of buying our home decades ago. His office hadn't changed much. The same oak desk, the same framed certificates, even the same clock ticking steadily against the far wall. When he saw me walk in, he stood up with a gentle smile. Margaret, he said warmly, it's been too long. I tried to smile back, but my hands trembled as I set the thermos on his desk. I need your help, I said quietly. And this time, it's not about buying, it's about protecting. I told him everything. The diagnosis, Tyler's sudden kindness, the talk of transferring ownership, the way Emily had started echoing her husband's words like they were her own. Mr. Jacobs listened in silence, his expression unreadable, fingers steepled beneath his chin. When I finished, the room felt heavy, as if the truth itself had weight. I see, he said finally. You've always been a thoughtful woman, Margaret. I think it's time we put some of that thought into action. He explained my options, trusts, wills, and charitable transfers. I listened carefully, letting his words form a plan inside my mind. Then he looked me straight in the eye and said, You don't owe them your legacy just because they share your name. A will should reflect who you are, not who others pretend to be around you. Something inside me steadied, like a door locking into place. By noon, the paperwork had begun. We drafted the formation of the Margaret Hope Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to helping low-income cancer patients access treatment and care. Every asset I owned, my home, my savings, my small investments, would fund it. The house that had sheltered me would now shelter hope. The thought made my chest ache, but not from pain, from peace. As I signed each page, I felt years of exhaustion lift. My hand wavered once when I wrote my name for the final time. I thought of Emily's face when she was a little girl, the freckles across her nose, the way she used to fall asleep with her head on my lap. But then I remembered the sound of Tyler's voice. "Let's get the property papers ready first." That sentence hardened me again. Love should never have a price tag. Before leaving, Mr. Jacobs placed a copy of the documents into a sealed envelope. "Keep this safe," he said. "And don't tell them anything until you're ready." I nodded. "They think I'm sick," I said softly. Maybe that's the one advantage I have left. When I returned home, the sun was beginning to set. The house glowed with that soft orange light that used to make it feel alive. Tyler was in the driveway talking on his phone, pacing like a man measuring territory. He gave me a polite smile and opened the door for me. "How was your day, Mom?" he asked smoothly. I smiled back, the same practiced politeness. "Productive," I said. "I took care of something important." That night, as I lay in bed, I felt a strange calm settle over me. For the first time since my diagnosis, I wasn't afraid, not of dying, and not of them. I had something stronger than fear now. I had a plan. I whispered into the darkness, "Robert, if you can hear me, our home will mean something good again." The house creaked softly, almost as if it was listening. 3 days later, the air in the house changed. It was something subtle at first, a shift in tone, a tension that hummed under every conversation. Tyler had become unusually attentive again, his voice soft, his gestures careful, but his eyes told another story, sharp, impatient, waiting. I knew what was coming, and I was ready for it. That evening, while I sat by the living room window reading an old novel, Tyler walked in wearing that charming smile of his, the one that could fool strangers, but not me anymore. "Mom," he said smoothly, "I had a word with my attorney friend today. He told me it's risky not to prepare legal documents in advance. With your condition, we just don't want any complications later." I looked up slowly. "What kind of complications?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. He pulled out a folder, thick and neatly organized. "Just routine stuff," he said lightly. "It's a transfer of property to Emily for security. In case anything happens, the house will stay in the family. We can always amend things later if needed." Emily appeared in the doorway behind him, her face pale and uncertain. She didn't meet my eyes. "Mom," she murmured, "please just sign it. Tyler's only trying to protect us. You don't have to worry about anything." I studied them for a long moment. My daughter, the child I'd raised through sleepless nights, now stood beside a man who wanted to erase me while I was still alive. The silence stretched until it felt like a wall between us. Then I smiled faintly and said, "If it will make you both feel better, let's do this properly. I'll call Mr. Jacobs. He should be here to witness it." Tyler hesitated, but pride won over suspicion. "Sure," he said confidently. "The more official, the better." Within an hour, Mr. Jacobs arrived. He entered with his calm professional air, greeted them politely, and set his briefcase on the table. Tyler handed him the folder with a triumphant smile. "We just need a signature," he said. Mr. Jacobs nodded, opened the papers, and then, without looking up, said quietly, "Actually, there's been a change. Mrs. Margaret updated her will recently. Everything is already settled." Tyler froze. "Updated," he repeated, his tone sharpening. "Yes," Mr. Jacobs continued evenly. "All assets, including the property, savings, and investments, are now part of the Margaret Hope Foundation, a nonprofit supporting cancer research and treatment. She has full control until her passing, after which the foundation's board will manage the assets." For a moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the clock ticking on the wall. Then Tyler's face turned red, his voice rising. "What foundation? What are you talking about? You're giving everything away to strangers?" I met his gaze without flinching. "Not strangers," I said calmly. "People who fight for life, not money." He slammed the folder shut, fury breaking through his mask of politeness. "After everything we've done for you," he started, but I cut him off. "Everything you've done for me?" My voice was quiet, but it carried across the room like a strike. "You mean pretending to care while waiting for me to die? Love tested by money isn't love, it's a transaction." Emily burst into tears. "Mom, please don't do this," she cried. You don't understand. Tyler just wanted to help. I turned to her gently. No, Emily. I understand perfectly. I raised you to love people, not to own them. But you've let someone teach you the opposite. Tyler grabbed his coat, his voice shaking with anger. You'll regret this, he said. When you need help, remember that the foundation won't hold your hand. I didn't move. That's all right, I said softly. I'd rather die with dignity than live in debt to greed. He stormed out, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the windows. Emily followed him halfway before stopping, torn between loyalty and shame. When the sound of the car engine faded, the house fell quiet, the kind of quiet that feels like truth settling into place. Mr. Jacobs gathered the papers, his expression steady, but his eyes kind. You did the right thing, Margaret, he said. It takes courage to protect what's rightfully yours. When he left, I sat alone in the same chair by the window, watching the reflection of the porch light flicker across the glass. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from release. For the first time in months, I felt in control of my life again. The house, once filled with whispers of betrayal, felt steady, like it had finally taken a deep breath. I whispered into the silence, Robert, it's done. The home you built will save lives now. The next morning, the house was painfully quiet. Emily's door stayed shut, her footsteps absent from the hallway. I made myself tea and sat at the kitchen table, the sunlight spilling through the window like a slow apology. The chair across from me, Tyler's chair, was empty, and for once, I didn't mind. The calm that followed his departure felt strange, like a wound that had stopped bleeding but hadn't yet healed. 2 days later, Emily packed her bags. She didn't say much, just moved quietly from room to room, her face swollen from crying. I watched her fold her clothes, her hands trembling slightly. Are you leaving? I asked softly. She nodded, her voice breaking as she said, Tyler's staying at a friend's place for now. He just needs time. He said I should come with him. I wanted to ask if she really believed that, but I didn't. Instead, I said, Emily, before you go, I want you to know something. Everything I've done, every choice, wasn't against you. It was for you, even if you don't see it yet. She looked up, eyes glistening. You gave everything away, Mom. To a foundation. To strangers. What's left for me? I smiled sadly. What's left for you is a lesson. One I learned too late in life. That love and greed cannot share the same heart. She turned away, wiping her tears, and whispered, I just wish you'd trusted me. Then she left. The sound of her car pulling out of the driveway was softer than I expected, almost merciful. Weeks passed. I focused on my treatment, my appointments, my routines. Mr. Jacobs checked in occasionally to update me on the foundation paperwork. The house grew quieter, but I filled it with music sometimes, the old jazz records Robert used to play when we painted the porch together. There were moments I caught myself humming along, surprised to realize I could still feel light inside me. One afternoon, while I was watering the plants on the porch, Mrs. Green from next door called out, Margaret, I saw something on the news. Isn't your son-in-law named Tyler? My heart skipped. I turned toward her, shielding my eyes from the sun. Yes, I said slowly. She frowned, holding up her phone. They said a real estate agent in town was arrested for fraud and embezzlement. Big scandal, fake investment schemes, forged client papers. His picture was right there. The watering can slipped from my hand, the water spilling across the steps. I didn't need to see the article. I already knew. Tyler's empire had been built on deceit, and now it was crumbling. That evening, Emily called. It was the first time I'd heard her voice in over a month. She was crying. Mom, they took him. He's in custody. They say he might go to prison. I didn't know, I swear I didn't. I listened quietly, her sobs echoing through the line. I believe you, I said finally. But believing you doesn't erase what's been done. I don't have anywhere to go, she whispered. Everyone's talking, my friend stopped answering. Tyler's gone and her voice cracked. Mom, can I come home? For a long time, I didn't answer. The memory of her standing beside Tyler, begging me to sign those papers, flickered painfully in my mind. But then I remembered the look on her face when she was little, the way she used to run to me after scraping her knees, crying until she fell asleep in my lap. That image softened me. "Yes," I said quietly. "Come home." When she arrived, she looked like a shadow of herself, tired, broken, fragile. She dropped her bags in the hallway and stood there, not knowing whether to hug me or apologize first. I stepped forward and gently touched her arm. "You don't need to say anything," I told her. "You've said enough with coming back." For days, she hardly spoke. She followed me to appointments, cooked small meals, and sat beside me during chemo sessions, her silence filled with regret. I didn't ask about Tyler, and she didn't mention him. The world had already taken care of that chapter for us. One afternoon, as we drove home from the hospital, she finally broke the silence. "Mom," she said quietly, "I'm sorry. I let him turn me into someone I don't even recognize." Her voice trembled. "When you said you'd rather die with dignity."
I didn't understand it then.
"I do now." I looked at her face older than it should have been, her eyes finally open, and I simply said, "Understanding is the first step to forgiveness." That night, I stood at the window again, looking out at the pecan trees swaying under the streetlight. The house, once heavy with betrayal, now held the faint hum of peace returning. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed, not sharp, just far enough away to remind me that life, even after pain, keeps moving. The months that followed were slow, quiet, and strangely gentle. My days found a new rhythm: hospital visits, medication schedules, small walks through the garden when my body allowed it. Emily stayed with me through all of it. She cooked simple meals, cleaned the house, and sat beside me during my treatments without saying much. Sometimes she would just hold my hand when the pain grew sharp, and in that silence, I could feel her trying to make amends without words. Chemotherapy changes a person. It isn't just the hair that falls. It's the pride, the energy, the version of yourself that once stood unshaken. I remember the first morning I saw my reflection after my hair began thinning. I expected to feel devastated, but instead, I felt oddly free. There was nothing left to hide. Emily stood behind me, watching quietly. "You still look like my mom," she said softly. I smiled faintly and replied, "Then maybe you're finally seeing me the way I am, not the way you wanted me to be." Some days, Emily would drive me through the old parts of Austin, down streets filled with pecan trees and weathered porches. She would talk about her childhood memories, the lemonade stands, the backyard swings, the Christmas lights Robert used to hang crookedly every year. It felt like opening an old scrapbook together, page by page, each memory softening something inside us both. One evening, as the sun dipped low behind the neighborhood, painting the sky in gold and rose, Emily brought me tea and sat down at the edge of my bed. "Mom," she began carefully, "I've been thinking about everything. About Tyler, about what I became when I was with him. I thought love meant loyalty, no matter what, even when it hurt other people. But now I know it's not love if it asks you to betray someone who truly cares for you." Her eyes filled with tears. "You were right, Mom. You were always right." I reached for her hand, my skin pale and paper-thin, but still warm. "Emily," I said quietly, "I don't need you to tell me I was right. I just need you to promise me something." She nodded quickly. "Anything." I took a deep breath. "Promise me you'll never let money decide who you are or who you love. Because once you let greed write your story, it will erase everything that ever mattered." She started crying then, not the quick, guilty kind of tears she used to shed, but the deep, cleansing kind that come when truth finally sinks in. She leaned forward, hugging me tightly, whispering, "I promise, Mom. I promise." That night, as she slept on the couch in the living room, I walked quietly through the house, barefoot, steadying myself against the walls. The air smelled faintly of lavender and lemon soap. I paused in the hallway, looking at the family photos, Robert holding baby Emily, Emily's graduation picture, our first Christmas after his passing. For the first time in years, the memories didn't hurt. They felt like anchors, keeping me grounded instead of pulling me under. Over the next few weeks, the treatment began to show results. My doctor smiled cautiously and said the words I hadn't dared hope for. The cancer is shrinking. I thanked him, but inside I was already thanking something bigger. The patience, the forgiveness, the quiet grace that had somehow kept me alive when everything else had fallen apart. One afternoon, Emily and I sat on the porch, watching the wind stir the pecan leaves. The sun warmed my face, and I could hear children laughing down the street. Emily handed me a glass of lemonade and said, "Do you ever regret it, Mom? Giving everything to the foundation?" I looked at her for a long moment and then said, "No, sweetheart. Because what I gave away wasn't my life, it was my legacy. And I'd rather it build something for others than be lost in someone else's greed." She smiled through her tears. "You're stronger than anyone I know." I looked out toward the fading sky, where the last light of day glowed soft and golden. "No," I said quietly. "I'm just a woman who finally stopped mistaking love for ownership." The days turned into weeks, the pain into calm, and the house into something new, not a place of betrayal anymore, but of healing. Emily still carried guilt, but she was learning to forgive herself, and I was learning to let her. Together, we were rebuilding not the home, but the love that used to fill it. A year later, the sky over Austin was clear and blue, the kind of day Robert would have called a blessing disguised as weather. I stood outside a modest new building downtown, its glass windows catching the sunlight, its name etched in silver above the entrance, the Margaret Hope Foundation. People had gathered, doctors, volunteers, former patients, and friends, faces I didn't know but hearts I already felt connected to. Emily stood beside me, holding my arm gently, proud and quiet. When I first dreamed of the foundation, I never imagined I'd live to see its doors open. But life, in its strange mercy, had granted me that gift. The treatments had worked. The cancer wasn't gone, but it was no longer winning. I was thinner now, slower, my voice softer than before, but I was still here, still breathing, still standing. Inside, the lobby smelled faintly of fresh paint and hope. On one wall hung a large framed photograph of Robert and me, taken in front of our old house years ago. Beneath it, a small plaque read, "For those who choose kindness over comfort and love over wealth." As the small crowd settled, I was invited to speak. Emily squeezed my hand and whispered, "You can do this, Mom." I smiled and stepped toward the podium. For a moment, I simply looked at the faces before me, some smiling, some tearful, all waiting. Then I began. When I was younger, I said, I believed money was security. That if you saved enough, worked hard enough, planned carefully enough, you could protect yourself from pain. But the truth is, no amount of money can protect you from betrayal or heal the ache of a love that's been tested and failed. I paused, my voice trembling just slightly. Last year, when I was diagnosed with cancer, I thought the disease was my punishment. But over time, I realized it was my teacher. It showed me who really stood beside me and who only stood close enough to reach what I owned. And when I finally saw that difference clearly, I stopped being afraid of dying and started learning how to live. The room was silent except for the soft hum of the air conditioning. Emily's eyes glistened as I continued. People ask why I gave everything to a foundation instead of my family. My answer is simple. Love tested by money isn't love, it's a transaction. I didn't want to leave behind a house filled with resentment. I wanted to leave behind a home filled with purpose. I took a slow breath, the kind you take when the truth finally feels lighter than the lie you've carried for too long. If you remember anything from my story, I said, let it be this. The wealth you keep will fade, but the kindness you share will live longer than your name ever will. Applause rose softly at first, then stronger, until it filled the hall. I smiled, not from pride, but from peace. For once, everything felt exactly as it should. After the ceremony, Emily led me outside. The evening light painted everything gold. She turned to me and said, Dad would have been so proud. I smiled at the mention of his name. He already is, I said quietly. He's here in every brick, every hand that helped build this. We stood together as people filed out, laughing and chatting, the building glowing behind us. Emily slipped her arm through mine. "Mom," she said, "thank you for not giving up on me." I looked at her, my heart soft but steady. "You're my daughter," I replied. "The lesson was never meant to hurt you. It was meant to save you." As the last rays of sunlight stretched across the street, I felt something settle inside me. A stillness, a quiet kind of joy. I wasn't rich, not in the way people measure it. But I had peace, forgiveness, and the certainty that my life, in its final chapters, had meant something. I looked up at the foundation sign one last time and whispered to myself, this was never about dying. It was about living rightly. Then I smiled, a calm, contented smile that belonged to a woman who had finally learned that real inheritance isn't in what we leave behind, but in what we awaken in others. Before I end my story, I want to ask you something. If my journey touched your heart or made you think differently about love and family, please subscribe to my channel. It helps me share more stories like this one. And tell me in the comments, what would you do if the people you trusted the most chose money over love? I'll be reading your answers.